Hello, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Director's Masterclass. My name is Bashood Ahmed and I am the Secretariat with CGM Climate Governance Malaysia. It is my pleasure to open today's session, which is on biodiversity matters, leveraging nature's wealth for business and sustainability. This masterclass is a collaborative initiative designed to enhance your proficiency in all areas of climate change and to provide the latest insights and shifts in the market pertaining to sustainability. We are proud to partner with Bursa Malaysia, FIDI Forum, Security Commission, and the Institute of Directors Commission, ICDM, who are actively promoting this event. Today's session is a joint effort between Climate Governance Malaysia and Bursa Malaysia in partnership with the PLC Transformation Program. We believe that the knowledge that will be shared today will be invaluable in guiding your businesses towards sustainable practices that leverage the wealth of nature for long-term success. Before we begin, a few housekeeping rules. To ensure confidentiality, there will be no recordings during the Q&A session. Additionally, please keep your phones on silent mode to avoid any disruptions. As the Secretariat of Climate Governance Malaysia, I encourage you to extend any question you may have towards myself or my colleagues Sarah and Shern. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to an engaging and insightful session. Let's dive into the crucial topic of biodiversity and its impact on business sustainability. Before we proceed further, I would like to invite the Chairperson of CGM, Datin Sunita, to introduce our speakers for today. Datin Sunita, please.
That was his first public speaking assignment. He did a great job, right? Thank you so much, everyone. Warm welcome to all of you. Sorry for dragging you out so early. Thank you for being patient. Welcome to the third session of the CGM Masterclass 2024, part of our six-part program. We appreciate your continued participation and dedication to enhancing your expertise in climate governance. I really want to thank Tan Sri Wahid, Chairman of Bursa Malaysia and Bursa, for their invaluable support. I think many of you realize that although much of the conversation in the last few years has been on mitigation, managing emissions footprint, but the conversation is moving very quickly to nature. As a matter of fact, it has been said that if by this year you do not have a coherent net zero strategy, you will have no credibility as a business. Unfortunately, by next year, if you don't have an nature positive strategy, you are going to lose credibility quickly as well. So nature, biodiversity is really coming front and center now. And that's why I'm really pleased that today we have Faizal Parish, Director of the Global Environment Center, a distinguished ecologist and environmental management specialist with 40 years of experience across 20 countries. It is very rare for us to have someone of this expertise, experience in this country, and so we are delighted to be able to welcome him. Some of you may even have read his op-ed in The Edge last month, which has been curated by CGM as well. Faizal is constantly called on by the ministry in a consultative advisory process, and so we're very fortunate to hear from him today as well. He has co-chaired the peatland working group of the Roundtable on the RSPO and has collaborated extensively with the plantation sector. Currently, he's assisting the ASEAN Secretariat in developing a framework for haze-free sustainable land management. I would now like to welcome Aina Zahari, Director of Corporate Strategy, who will be presenting the opening remarks today.
Corporate leaders, good morning. First, allow me to convey regrets from Tan Sri Wahid that he wasn't able to be here this morning. So much of what I'll actually say is actually was planned for him. Unfortunately, late last night, an unplanned matter came up that he had to go for. But as chairman of Bursa Malaysia himself and as chairman of WWF Malaysia, this topic clearly resonated with him, and he would have loved to be here. Thank you, Datin Sri Sunita, for setting the stage for today's discussion. This actually marks the third year of Bursa Bursa's collaboration with Climate Governance Malaysia as part of a sustainability topics under the PLC transformation program pillar that my team runs. But this, with Climate Governance Malaysia, usually the topics are targeted for board of directors and also senior management. About 25% of the over 1,000 PLCs that we have listed on the exchange have to date signed up for the PLC transformation program. If your companies are among the group, or if you're not sure, please, my one call is to please check and do ask management to apprise you of relevant actions that they have taken recently or incorporated as part of business plans or as part of engagement of stakeholders to do better. If you have not sure what I'm talking about on PLC transformation and you are a listed PLC, please talk to any of my team members. We'll be happy to share a little bit more information, because what we do have as part of the program, it's non-prescriptive, but we do have various topics, not just on sustainability like this one, but also on various other topics like digitalization, innovation, and it's geared for different levels of the working. So, some of the other PLCs might have been attending that your teams might not be aware of. Now back to today. Your participation today, of course, demonstrates that you're well attuned to the importance of our collective efforts in driving sustainable practices and leveraging nature's wealth for the betterment of businesses, society, and ultimately the country. We're seeing positive results of the country's strong fundamentals reflected in promising capital market developments of late. The equities market hit a record-breaking market capitalization of 2 trillion last month. The market has been vibrant, and average trading value is up 53% this year. This market vibrancy, investor interest in the market can only be sustained with solid earnings that stem from sustainable businesses' performance and strong ESG, which is why we are heartened to see a room full of corporate leaders from diverse organizations across different industries and company sizes gathered here today for today's discussion on biodiversity matters, leveraging nature's wealth for business sustainability. Global shift towards climate change is crucial to cap temperature increases. Many countries that account for nearly 90% of global emissions have made net zero goals, for example. But I think today you'll understand more about recognizing the link between climate change and biodiversity conservation, where it's key. There's a lot of integration that needs to happen to meet these commitments, and UN Sustainable Development Goal 15 on life on land, protecting life on land. Supporting biodiversity also aids other economic and social SDGs, benefiting communities and businesses. So it's imperative, and there's an opportunity for both businesses to play a role and to understand the challenges and the opportunities that come from it. So we do very much hope PLCs would clearly incorporate sustainability into your business strategies, setting targets, and pursuing where there might be opportunities for you to reduce carbon emissions with other co-benefits. On our part of the exchange, we remain dedicated to supporting PLCs where you can in these efforts through capacity building opportunities such as this. And we also are constantly expanding our products to serve your needs. We're particularly excited actually to have next month our inaugural auction of Malaysia's first nature-based product on the Bursa Carbon Exchange, featuring high-quality carbon credits from the Kuamut Rainforest Conservation Project in Sabah. And I bring this up because the project delivers tangible co-benefits, earning itself a gold level for climate status under the Climate, Community and Biodiversity CCB standards. So I do welcome all of you to help to learn today, and thank you for your participation. And then I pass the floor to our guest speaker for his insights into integrating biodiversity conservation strategies into business models. Have a fruitful session. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Faizal Parish. I'm the Director of Global Environment Center. I'm going to be talking, I have about 75 minutes, but that doesn't mean you can go to sleep. We're going to have it in two parts, and then we'll split the time. We will have a first part, which is more introduction and the background and some of the theory, and then we will break and have opportunity for some question and feedback. And then we will have a second part, which is more looking at some examples and the way forward, and then a second round of discussion. So I hope you all keep engaged, and I believe that those who are not paying attention, then you will not get the refreshments afterwards. So please pay attention, and I believe there is some tracking device here to see who's paying attention or who's playing with their phone. So, let me start off with a little bit of background about my organization, Global Environment Center. We're a Malaysian non-profit organization. Our global headquarters is here. We're established 25 years ago, and we're working in all of the ASEAN member states and elsewhere in Asia Pacific, as well as inputting on global and regional policy issues. So one of our key tagline and purpose is building partnership for the environment. So we're very much focused on bringing together government, private sector, civil society, and communities to try to solve common problems. And sometimes, unfortunately, this world, the way it works, everyone is divided into silos. So there are different silos between industry and forest management and agriculture. They're all in a different place. And even our environmental problem, you would think, oh, that would be all integrated. No, we have one silo is climate change, another silo is land degradation, another silo is biodiversity. And sometime when you attend, and each of them have their own global community and global meeting and global approach, and sometime when you go to the different meetings of those, you think we're dealing with 3 different planets, not one planet. There's a biodiversity planet, there's a climate change planet, and there's a land degradation planet, and everyone is talking, not linking up between the two. So I think the key thing to remember is we only have one planet, and we only have one chance to save it. As President Macron said, there is no planet B when we mess up the first one. And so we need to take an integrated approach. So when we're thinking about climate change, we have to think about ecosystem and nature as well. Why? Because, for example, in Malaysia, the Malaysian government strategy is to get to net neutral. We're expecting the forest to absorb most of the emission from the industry sector. But when it comes to financing, there is no mechanism for transferring from the industry sector to support forests, except now Bursa Malaysia is establishing those mechanisms, but still that's ignored in the current government planning process. They're all treated as something different, and people in different silos are coming up with a plan, not connecting to the other silo. So we need to have this integrated and comprehensive approach. For Global Environment Center, we also have some silos. We have different programs on river care, forest and coastal management, peatland, and outreach and partnership. And we've implemented more than 260 projects around the world and got recognition from various places and have multiple partners from government, private sector, civil society, and so on, and produced a lot of document and publication. And one of our strengths is producing technical solution to major problem, but doing it in a way through engaging different companies, different stakeholders, coming together, addressing a problem in a collective manner, and coming out with practical solution, not just complaining or whatever. We have to work on practical solution and to support implementation of that. So maybe enough of introduction of the organization. Maybe we need to introduce the topic of biodiversity. What do we mean? Sometimes when people just say biodiversity, oh, this is about the birds and the bees, some animal in the forest, some monkey raiding my durian orchard or something, but they don't relate it to overall and how important it is. So when we say biodiversity, biodiversity is short form of biological diversity, but it rarely covers the variability of all living organisms, but it's not only at the species level, it's species and ecosystem and even down to components of ecosystem. So it covers everything, habitat, ecosystems, functioning. Everything in the natural world is part of biodiversity, including us. We are a species and we are part of that. Sometimes we ignore that we're part and we're dependent on that. Ecosystem is that habitat of interacting complex of different organisms, such as forests, coral reef, peatlands, deserts, and so on. Those are all ecosystem, and the species there are adapted to those conditions. And then these ecosystems provide ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the benefits that we obtain, but many people don't realize how much come from ecosystem or biodiversity that benefit us. We think, what do we get? Nothing. I get my food from the supermarket, I get the water from the tap, I get the medicine from the pharmacy. What's this got to do with this nature thing? Oh, this is not important to me or not important to my company. But that is far from the truth. Biodiversity sustains ecosystem services crucial for human well-being and economic prosperity, including pollination, soil fertility, climate regulation, water supply, flood control, disease regulation. The World Economic Forum has estimated that more than 50% of global GDP, or $44 trillion is dependent on biodiversity and the services it supports. That is an incredible, massive figure. 50% of world GDP depends on biodiversity and nature. So the action of businesses can lead to biodiversity loss and associated business risks, or can create opportunity for enhancing sustainability and profitability. So the choice is yours, in your hands. You need to think of that strategy. And for too long, companies around the world have been ignoring the importance of ecosystem and biodiversity, and they're ignoring at their own peril. It's leading to major problems and risks. So let's look a little bit more about the biodiversity benefit. What can we get? And this is drawn from World Economic Forum study, which was published recently. So number one benefit, biodiversity ensures health and food security. Biodiversity underpins global nutrition and food security because everything that you get in the supermarket is derived from natural species. We're not currently eating artificial thing that is made from rock or from other things. We're not yet eating that. Maybe we'll be forced to in future, but everything is derived from nature, has been evolved, has been bred, and so on. And then every country around the world does have indigenous produce, and amongst the species that we are relying on, like whether it's wheat or rice or so on, those are derived from plant breeding from hundreds of varieties around the world. Unfortunately, we're losing that biodiversity of crops by standardizing, by just breeding and only going for one or two crops. So for rice, most of the rice production now is only for a few varieties, and the 400 or 500 varieties of the past, they're disappearing or have been lost. When we lose the agrobiodiversity, we lose those special traits evolved over millions of years that can help us adapt to climate change, changing temperatures, disease patterns, if we lose that biodiversity. Secondly, biodiversity helps us fight disease. And we all know about disease. We've had COVID before, and we saw how vulnerable the whole world was to COVID. And how do we get COVID and other disease like it? We get that when we bring humans and multiple species and biodiversity into constrained or artificial situation, and you get crossover of genetic material between those in the farming or the production or the marketing system, and that leads to creation of new zoonotic diseases. So the studies are showing the more diverse we have, the better we protect our nature, the less emerging diseases, because nature over millions of years are keeping things under control, and there are natural predators and natural balance system that when we're disrupting those ecosystems, then we're getting the consequences. Third benefit, biodiversity benefits business. As I said, more than half the world's GDP is highly or moderately dependent on nature. Global sales of pharmaceuticals based on materials of natural origin is $75 billion a year, and many of the other drugs that we have, 75% of cancer drugs are derived from nature or synthesized based on naturally occurring chemicals. Biodiversity also provides livelihood. So humans derive approximately $125 trillion of value from natural ecosystems each year. Globally, 3 out of 4 jobs are dependent on water, which is nurtured or provided by nature. And the agriculture sector, the plants which are derived from nature, employs 60% of the world's working poor. In the global south, forests are the source of livelihood for 1.6 billion people. Even restoring back nature is an industry of itself. Restoration economy is worth 25 billion a year. Frankly, we don't want the restoration economy because we should have kept or preserved nature in the proper way, given its value. But because we have destroyed nature, we have to create a new economy or industry of restoring it back. So nature-positive businesses can provide cost-effective, robot-proof, business-friendly jobs that stimulate the rural economy without harming the environment. These are the green jobs of the future, and there are so many possibilities of generating work for people to act as stewards or managers of the land and restoring biodiversity. So fifth, biodiversity protects us. So biodiversity makes the world habitable. Without plants, we're living, the whole world is a planet of rock and volcanoes and deserts, and we're not able to live without nature that has adjusted the planet's situation. We also would have no oxygen to breathe without the plants that produce it. So biodiverse ecosystems provide nature-based solutions that we can use to address climate change and other problems. And if we destroy nature, so for example, clearance of 35% of the world's mangroves for human activity has put our coastal communities under threat from erosion, storm, sea level rise, and so on. Protecting and restoring natural ecosystems is vital to fighting climate change. Nature-based solutions could provide an estimated 37% of cost-effective CO2 mitigation needed by 2030 to keep the planet within the target 2 degrees. Unfortunately, our real target is 1.5 degrees, but we are losing that opportunity because we have still allowed carbon dioxide emission to increase. We are still not seriously taking to protect nature, but 37% of cost-effective. Unfortunately, cost-effective is not the preferred choice, it seems. I've been attending dialogues here in Malaysia on what is Malaysia's long-term low-emission development strategy, and to get to our carbon neutral target by 2050, what is being proposed is not the cost-effective nature solution, but the very expensive carbon capture and utilization, which may cost 50 times more than nature-based solution, but a company is going to benefit more by getting paid massive amount for these solutions. So we know that sometimes the decisions made in business and also in politics is not always to the best or the most cost-effective, but may be driven by how much equity issues, how much certain people will benefit from such a solution. But we have to push to a better arrangement where we're looking at the most important necessary solution, because if we ignore nature as part of our climate solution and say it will only be by creating new technology and machinery to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, or geoengineering to change the planet, or float space mirrors to reflect the sun back, all of these things are extremely high, expensive, are not going to proven to work, and they will just enable business as usual to carry on until we destroy the planet. So we really need to be are serious about addressing. So let's look at the loss of biodiversity. Unfortunately, nature is declining at unprecedented rate. Nearly 1 million species at risk of extinction because of human activity, and already many have gone extinct. Amazon rainforest, the world's coral reef, boreal forest biomes, and Southeast Asia's forests are all approaching the edge of irreversible tipping points with far-reaching effect on economy, society, and life. So this also from one of the World Economic Forum studies. So 1/3 of the world's topsoil has been degraded, 83% population decline across freshwater species since 1970, 60% population decline across vertebrates since 1970, 50% of the world's coral reefs have been destroyed. So the situation is very bad. That life support system of the planet is collapsing. The planet needs to be in ICU, but we're just giving it Panadol. It's not going to save the planet unless we're serious about it. So many of the things that we're doing are destroying or degrading. And that, of course, some companies are making money by destroying, but it impacts the rest of us and all the other businesses when those life-supporting or industry-supporting ecological services are lost. So what are the risks to business? The decline of ecosystems poses 3 main biodiversity-related risks. Disruption of supply chain. Half of the world's GDP heavily dependent on functional natural ecosystems. So if those ecosystems are degraded, then that will affect the supply chain. For example, foods producers may face increased costs due to vanishing natural pollinators. The bee populations of the world are crashing as a result of pesticide and chemicals, and then if we do not have bees to pollinate the plants, all the crops start failing. That has a major implication. Second risk, regulatory pressure. So the governments are increasingly imposing regulation related to biodiversity, potentially leading to additional costs for non-compliant businesses. And thirdly, reputation and social license. Companies that ignore the negative impact of our operation on biodiversity risk eroding good customer goodwill and social license to operate. Let's look at the risks. So World Economic Forum ranks all risks, everything from labor to terrorism to other threats. I'm not sure how clearly you can see, but this is high likelihood. This is likelihood. So this is high likelihood and high impact. And so this quadrant of high likelihood and high impact are the risks we need to be most concerned about. And this is biodiversity. You can see this is year to year, biodiversity in 2018, 2019, and 2020. The risk is like shooting off the top of the scale, and this has become the only exceeded risk is the risk of climate sector failure in reduction of emission is the only one which is higher than biodiversity loss as a risk to global business. So this is not the environmentalists saying this is World Economic Forum saying this. But the opposite side of the coin is the crisis also presents opportunities. Market expansion, if companies support or can derive new business related to biodiversity, innovative products and services, attract environmental conscious customers, and tap into new markets, that is a new business opportunity. Improve brand value, responding to sustainability demands, and access to capital and cost saving. So biodiversity-focused companies may find it easier to secure capital. They can reduce raw material and energy costs by adapting to sustainable practices. So positive, biodiversity positive can be positive for the bottom line and business. If you ignore biodiversity, it's at your own peril, and over time, you will have a major impact to your market credibility and also returns. So one of the global frameworks that has recently been adopted about 18 months ago is the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, adopted by all the countries around the world under the framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And this highlights certain key things related to business sector. It encourages businesses, especially corporations and financial institutions, to implement measures for biodiversity conservation and sustainable practice. It promotes regular monitoring, assessment, and transparency disclosure. It encourages provision of information to consumers, making sustainable consumption choices, and it promotes ensuring compliance with regulations. So let's just look a little bit of the funding flow. Is the funding flow globally adequately? Currently, finance flow to so-called nature-based solutions of 200 billion, so to protect and recover nature, they're outweighed by 7 trillion of financial flow that is destroying nature. So the destroyer of nature, we're funding the finance sector. The global community is financing 7 trillion of destructive activity and compensating by 200 billion to protect nature. And we congratulate ourselves for doing a good job. Fantastic, 200 billion to protect nature, but 7 trillion to destroy it. That doesn't have to continue for too long before we face problem. And that's both the government, under the public funding, the subsidy or the contribution to things destructive of nature are 10 times larger than public funding for what is supporting nature. And for the 5 trillion of private finance flows, the money going to destruction of nature is 140 times larger than the money going to protect nature. So we seriously have a problem if we do not address this. Sometimes the environmentalists congratulate ourselves, oh, we've increased the amount of funding, we got some new funding for nature-based solution, but if we ignore the destructive funding, which is much, much bigger, if we do not bring that under control, we have a problem. So annual nature-based solution investment to meet the Rio targets of the global climate change, biodiversity and land degradation conventions, that needs to triple from 200 billion to 542 billion. But actually there's no point to triple it if we're still spending 7 trillion to destroy nature. And we triple to 540 billion to protect it, but 7 trillion is destroying. That's also not going to work. So we need to understand corporate biodiversity management. How do we do that? First, for each company, each organization, you need to assess your biodiversity footprint. So what is the impact of your business activity, where your operations interact with ecosystem, land use, resource extraction, including water or other raw materials, waste management, where your waste goes and how it impacts biodiversity. This will help you understand the footprint and identify areas for reduction of impact. Setting clear goals is the key second step. Once you know your footprint, to reduce your impact or to offset or compensate for the impact that you're having. And thirdly, you integrate the biodiversity consideration into your internal business strategy. This is not just some add-on PR activity. Let's plant a tree and take nice photographs and get recognized in media. This needs fundamental change of your business from inside out to transform what you're doing. You have to think that you have to be in nature positive. Everything the business must do. Mother Nature is sustaining your business. If you don't look after Mother Nature, if you kill Mother Nature, you have no business. So you must fundamentally change the way that you're working. So what are the best practice for corporate biodiversity management? These are just some suggestions, but you need to study your organization. Habitat conservation and restoration within the land bank of your company, that may be manufacturing, property development, plantation, forest management. You need to identify and conserve critical habitats within and around your business operation. And you can't ignore, oh, this is not my land, so I just let it, neighboring land to be destroyed. The destruction of surrounding land also impacts your business. The Indonesian government recently said that for all plantation companies doing oil palm and forest plantation in Indonesia, need to take care of 5 kilometers from their boundary to work with community and prevent fire within 5 kilometers of their boundary. That is a win-win for the company, because the fire 5 kilometers from your boundary will soon come and burn down your plantation, particularly in peatland areas and so on. But if you ignore what goes on beyond your boundary, it's like you're living in the blind, and then you will reap that disaster when it comes. You have to be proactive and work beyond your area. You need to look at adopting sustainable land use practices, minimize negative impact, and bring nature positive approach. And you need to engage stakeholders. Don't keep in the silo. You need to engage, whether it's community, business, local government, others around that are your stakeholders need to be part of that journey with you. Fourth, biodiversity monitoring and reporting. So you need to track what has been done, what is the status of the biodiversity in your land, and is your effort at management improving the situation, or it's still getting worse? How about neighbors' land, area around? Is it getting worse? That's the trend that will affect you. And then look at supply chain sustainability. You need to extend your biodiversity management effort to supply chain. This has happened a lot in the climate change sector, and many companies adopting the science-based targets, and they're looking at scope 1 and 2, which is internal, and scope 3, which is supply chain. That's happening. But for biodiversity and nature management, that is much rarer to look at your scope 3, that's your supply chain impacts. But that's starting to happen, and that needs to happen. Companies need to catch up with that. You cannot plead ignorance. I didn't know all my suppliers were destroying the forest, that all my raw material was a deforested national park and poisoning the river system. You cannot plead ignorance. Okay, this is part B, so I'm going to give you a few examples. Investing in biodiversity, just a few multinationals. So Danone, French multinational food products, they announced it will launch a biodiversity scorecard to assess its impact of its operation on biodiversity. And then that also covers the entire value chain from sourcing to production. GlaxoSmithKline committed to positive biodiversity at all GlaxoSmithKline sites by 2030, but neighboring area or other thing, not specified. And they've said 100% of agriculture, forestry, and marine-derived material will be sustainably sourced and deforestation-free by 2030. So still another 6 years to pollute, but I mean, these are important targets. Johnson & Johnson committed to protecting biodiversity, and they've set a biodiversity action plan with specific actions specified, and they create a global biodiversity partnership to collaborate with other organizations on biodiversity. Unilever made a significant commitment to publish a list of all suppliers that provide the company with palm oil, soy, paper, and other commodities, and committed to 100% of its agricultural raw materials sustainability by next year. IKEA, our favorite place to buy all our furniture, has created an IKEA Forest Positive Plan and commitment to plant 1 billion trees by 2030. But please remember, planting tree is not the solution to everything. Protecting the natural forest and tree is much more cost effective and much more important. Planting the trees look good and can help, it's a band-aid, but the fundamental thing, we need to protect the forest ecosystem. So these are some of the international example. I'd just like to take you on a little journey here in Malaysia on peatlands, and not all of you may know what peatlands are. Peatland are our most extensive wetland ecosystem across Southeast Asia. I guess everyone should know what wetlands are, and peatland is a subset of that. But in Malaysia, peatland ecosystem covers 8% of our land area in Malaysia. If it's 8% of the land area, and in Selangor State, 22% of Selangor State is peatland. But 98% of people in Selangor State don't know what is peatland, even though they may be living in it. So peatland is this natural ecosystem where start off as a wetland, where the organic material has formed over thousands of years, has accumulated under the trees in the forest to create a thick layer. In Malaysia, we have the deepest peat in the world, 25 meters thick. That's a 12-story building of organic material accumulated generally since the last ice age in the last 7,000 to 8,000 years. And this massive store of organic material is the world's #1 most important carbon store. When we say what's the most important carbon store, people will say forest. No. Peatland globally covers 3% of the land area, but stores twice as much carbon in the peat on 3% as the biomass of all the world's forests combined. Forests cover 30% of the land, and it's twice as much carbon is stored in the peat because under the trees is this 2 to 20 meter thick layer of accumulated organic material. So that becomes a giant sponge, and then actually 9% of the world's fresh water is stored in those peatlands. And here in Malaysia, they store peatlands like a sponge and prevent floods and provide water supply. Peatlands also have many rare endemic species, orangutan, sun bear, endemic fish species. Those are very important as part of the natural ecosystem, but also potential for ecotourism and other activity, income generating. Peatlands feed community, particularly poor and marginalized community, may be getting their sustenance from peatland system, and when we destroy it, we're destroying that thousands of years of support for local livelihood. Peatlands support community through products. This tree here, you're all familiar with, or not. This is the gelatong tree, which you know is the best source of natural chewing gum in the world. Gelatong gum is the best chewing gum, and this tree is natural latex. This is the Malaysian rubber tree. In Malaysia, we are growing rubber that we stole from Brazil, and we become the world #1 rubber producer using stolen biodiversity from Brazil. And we collapsed the Brazilian economy at the time and took over. But we have our own rubber tree, gelatong, in our peat swamp forest, but we don't harvest it or use it. In some countries in Indonesia, they do, and one of the biggest importer is Singapore, that doesn't like chewing gum, but they use this for high-end electrical insulation, and Japan is the other big importer for molding. So these things have very significant value, but they're undervalued. Peatlands regulate climate. They're the most important carbon store, and they regulate or release. When we degrade peatland, then we release all that stored carbon back to the atmosphere. So, are we managing our peatlands well in Malaysia? No. And also in ASEAN? No. More than 5 million hectares of the peatlands burned in the last 20 years. And did you know about that? Yes. If you suffered from breathing poor air quality and the famous transboundary haze, 90% of the transboundary haze coming to Malaysia is coming from burning of peatlands because they produce so many small particles. And the small particle that they produce, PM 2.5, 2.5 microns, those particles cross the blood-brain barrier. So we breathe them in, they end up in our brain, and they're killing an estimated, in 2015, 100,000 premature deaths come from the smoke from peatland fires. And over time, we're talking about millions of deaths related to inhaling the smoke from peatland fires. So very serious loss. 30% of the children living in around fire-prone peatlands in Indonesia have stunted growth. This is setting back whole generation of future because of the poor land management and poor approach, and the quick thinking of clearing land with fire is leading to massive destruction. So where are the peat in Malaysia? As I said, 8% of the land area, or 2.5 million hectares of peat. Largest area is in Sarawak, but Selangor has the highest percentage in terms of land area. Almost all the other states have them. So I want to look a little bit into the oil palm sector. because oil palm has been one of the sectors that has led to large-scale peatland development, at least 1 million hectare out of our 2.6 million hectares has been converted to oil palm plantations. And when you drain it, you lead to subsidence. That accumulated organic matter over the thousands of years, exposed and drained, starts breaking down. And you get collapsing, you get subsidence. In Johor, they have 4 meters of subsidence after they open up the area. And as a result, the land has subsided, the infrastructure has collapsed, and the area is continually flooding and cannot be used. So it's a very destructive impact. And the oil palm cultivation on peatland is the largest source of greenhouse gas emission in the oil palm sector, and one of the largest emissions in Malaysia. Up to 20 to 30% of all Malaysia's greenhouse gas emission come from oil palm plantation on peatland. So 1 million hectare, that is about 3% of our land area, is producing 30% or more of our greenhouse gas emission. So logic should say, let's concentrate our effort and resources on reducing emission on peatland area. But in the national plan strategy to 2050, there is zero action proposed to reduce emission from peatland, zero. So we have some problem in our plans. So over-drainage and poor site selection not only lead to degradation, but also to low yields. The yields can be as low as 5 tons per hectare, whereas you need 20 tons per hectare to be economically viable. So many of the plantations developed on peat are not economically viable unless you have good management practice. And you get this very common problem of all the palms start leaning over because the ground is subsiding around and the roots cannot keep support. So the tree will all fall over, then you can't harvest, and then you get disease, you get ganoderma, you get fungal attack, you have other problems, termites come in. You can, on the right, you can see also on peat, but with best management practice. This is only in one company in Malaysia we have seen. They have done the water management, following contour lines. They keep the water level high, they compact the peat, they make sure that there is always green cover, vegetation on the land. They don't allow it to be exposed. And there you can see the trees the same age are perfectly tall and straight, and they're getting 30 tons of oil palm per hectare per year. But it is possible with the technology to do it, but still it will be emitting carbon. It's still subsiding. So there's a limit to the number of generations you can do before you subside down to the flooded level. And also all these areas are vulnerable to fire. So we're getting more and more fires, burning and destroying oil palm plantations. So an oil palm plantation, a few thousand hectares, you've invested tens or 20 million in that, or you bought the stock on the Bursa of that company that has that, and a fire comes and burns for months and thousands of hectares are burnt out. Hundreds of millions of dollars invested is gone because you invested in the plantation growing on peat. Actually, 50% of the fossil fuel, 100% of all gas and part of the oil, fossil fuel, is derived from peatland of the past. Peatland in the era of dinosaur is our coal. 100% of our coal was peat swamp forest in the era of dinosaur. So what peatland is a fossil fuel. So when we talk about a peatland, you can see this is a lake of oil, a lake of fossil fuel, and now we're setting it alight. And it's going to burn for months on end and emit that. If you knew you had a lake or a field of fossil fuel, would you allow it to catch fire? Logically, you would not, but that is what is happening. And that's companies, when you're investing and buying the stocks of these companies that are doing this, you are supporting this practice. And it's burning down. If it's not burning down, it's flooding. Because as the peat is drained, it subsides. When it subsides below the natural flood level, this is what you have. And you can't drain it out, because some of these, they're close to sea level, they're close to river level. You cannot drain it out, so they abandon them. And then, so what use is abandoned? In Indonesia, we're seeing 25% of plantations developed close to the sea in the peat area are being abandoned. They're flooded and being abandoned. In Malaysia, we're starting to see that. as well. So this is a major loss. So what has been the response? It's not the government have totally ignored it, but governments have started to recognize the problem. Unfortunately, Malaysia, we're way behind our neighbors. Indonesia, after the massive fire and haze in 2015, have created a new peatland restoration agency. They've implemented new laws and regulation that stop any further development on peat and require better water management in peatland areas, and they supported large-scale restoration. Malaysia also, in December 2019, the National Land Council said no more development of intact forest or peatlands for oil palm is allowed in Malaysia, and that's built into the new MSPO standards. But still, there have been companies trying to find their way through, or, okay, not for big companies, but smallholder can do, so then smallholder develop. But this is basically needs to be better enforced. In Indonesia, as I said, the new regulation for water management from 2017 onwards has been implemented across more than 4 million hectares of land, which was developed for plantation. And they have set up the world's largest real-time water level monitoring system, covering 3.8 million hectares. Real-time data is shared back to Jakarta of what is the water level in the peat, and are the companies following the regulation, and then they can easily deploy teams to check. And the companies are required to put in water management structures and keep the water no more than 40 centimeter below the surface. Otherwise, potential of even taking the land away from them if they do not comply with the regulation. So that's led to transformation, and that's one reason why last year, even though there was 4-month drought in Sumatra and there was much less fire and almost no transboundary haze, it has been effective. But it still needs to be scaled up, and currently in Malaysia we don't have any regulation or any control about the water level or how we manage the peatland. We're really very vulnerable to large-scale fires. So re-wetting and restoring peatlands can lead to multiple benefits. This is one of the largest scales restoration project. This was a 1 million hectare abandoned rice cultivation scheme in Indonesia. That was the main source of the smoke and haze in 97-98. 500,000 hectares burned after the scheme was abandoned. And then this is a block there which was developed. I was involved in the project that did the first blocking of these drainage canal. And the canal here is 30 meters wide, 10 meters deep, 50 kilometers long, and it's 80 kilometers from the nearest road. And we had to block these canal which were draining the peat. And it was done over a period of a few months with help from local people. Everyone said it was impossible to do, but this block has been done and successfully done. On the bottom, this was done by WWF in Sabangau National Park. Again, blocking the drainage, bringing back the water level, leads to forest recovery, restoring those ecosystem services, but best not to destroy it in the first place. In the plantation itself, improved water management is the critical factor, not only to reduce degradation and emission, but also to improve productivity. And best management practice can be used. But we've also developed what we call the 5R approach to restoring peatland landscape for those areas that have been destroyed. And many of these projects for restoration are supported by plantation sector landowners, but also international community and government. So there are 5 steps. First, we need to re-wet. We need to block up the drainage system, raise the water up to near natural levels that help prevent fire and create the situation where the forest can start to recover. We need to reduce fire. So what we're doing is we're training local community to every day patrol the area and report. And we've introduced innovative warning systems that we get, for example, in Malaysia from Malaysian Meteorology. Every day we're giving the warning based on the weather of the fire risk, but we're also looking at the water level. The lower the water level in the peat, the higher the fire risk. So we're introducing now with Ministry of Agriculture across Malaysia, all agricultural areas on peat, having these warning signs linked to the water level. Third step, once you've stopped the fire, raised the water, we need to bring revegetation. Best is to get natural regeneration, but where it's severely degraded, then we need to do replanting. And our approach is always to use indigenous species and do all of the replanting program with the local community. So local community gets income, benefit from growing the seedling, from planting the trees, from maintaining the land, and when the forest is grown up and mature, maybe there are non-timber forest products that can be harvested. So it becomes a win-win situation, and the local support for such program increases. And then for those area outside the forest area, in the agricultural land, we need better agricultural practice. So zero burning practice, better water management in oil palm, zero burning in pineapple and other crops, and trying to have integrated pest management and integrated land management. And then we need proper reporting. So in the peatland landscapes we were working, in Malaysia we're working in 5 landscapes. Local community patrollers daily are going out and reporting real-time the situation, and then that's fed to all the government agencies to reduce the risk of fire. And we have been successful through this. This is a Bukit Lilau in Pahang, adjacent to a well-established plantation from IOI Corporation, and they put money in initially. The area was burning every 2 or 3 months. There were fires there, and they were also threatening the IOI plantations. Since we started the program with the community, re-wetted the area, raised water table, there has not been a fire for 5 years in the area. So it's a very great success, and the forest is now recovering, and Orang Asli community say that the fish are coming back, and many other benefits coming from the area. This is with the Saim Darby plantation. Adjacent to the Saim Darby plantation in Selangor, there was large area of peatland, which was always burning every year, become lalang, you can see top left. And then through the efforts, but even we started restoring, it was burning again. People were coming in deliberately to set fire. We found it was illegal land encroachers who were just trying to destroy the conservation project, but eventually they were in jail, and then the fires mysteriously stopped after they were arrested. And then now the area has fully recovered. And we planted trees, but now the natural regeneration has come in, and we have even more tree species, and wildlife has come back. Here's another example. This is IOI in Indonesia. IOI were suspended by RSPO in 2019 for clearing peatlands on their land in Indonesia after they had pledged globally zero peatland development. And inadvertently, the contractor carried on and cleared the peatland. You can see the situation in April 2016. So actually, sorry, they were suspended in 2015. This is a situation in April 2016, so totally bare area. And all that we did there was prevent fire, restore the natural water table. 2 years later, exactly the same spot, the forest can recover. So this, I said, natural regeneration, if you can do it, is the most cost-effective, the most resilient, and nature itself selects the right species to do it, rather than you're planting like a plantation, but nature has its own desire. If you can do rapid recovery, then you transform back, and then we were able to get the suspension on IOI lifted, and I think they learned an expensive lesson. They lost an estimated $150 million US because their whole certification globally was taken out, and they could not sell for 6 months certified sustainable palm oil, and they lost most of their contracts. Even some of the contracts to this day, they've not got back those clients. So this is what we were saying earlier about biodiversity risk. If you do not take care and follow best practice, it can hurt you incredibly. The benefit of clearing 300 hectares of peat to make additional plantation is just a very small possible benefit, and hundreds of millions of US dollar in losses, as well as reputation damage. Until this day, it's affected their reputation. But they can improve and come back, but much better not to destroy your reputation in the first place. Other results, this is in Selangor. Selangor, for those of you, well, most of you living in Selangor, you will know that we have, from time to time over the last 10 years, always have fire and haze, particularly in Kuala Selangor district. You can see, this is the area burnt in forest reserves in Selangor. You can see particularly 2012 to 2015, very high amount of fire, up to 1,500 hectares of forest reserve burnt in peatland. From 2015 onward, when we introduced the community-based fire prevention and water management, we've almost eliminated fire down to, I think, 4 hectares last year from 1,400. So we've stopped fire, we've stopped haze, the forest is recovering. Real results are happening. Biodiversity is coming back into the areas. We're getting sun bear, we've had panther, we've had many other things in the area that we've done recovery in. And then also some of the sites where we're protecting adjacent to plantation. We've had the hairy-nosed otter, which is the rarest otter in the world. We found, you have to peer into its nostrils to see how hairy it is. Most people don't do that. Panthers, tiger, many other rare species can survive, and when you recover well, these species can return to the areas. But what is the future? Can we continue to be growing oil palm on peat? Probably not, because even with the best practice, there will still be emission because you're draining it. We need to shift either to return it back to forest, but economically, can that be done? Or we need to find other crops. So these are suggestions of other crops that can be grown in peat, restored and re-wetted. Sago, common crop, we know about sago. Gelatong, as I mentioned down there, the swamp rubber. Melaleuca or gelam, that's where your tiger balm comes from. Honey production, many other benefit can come from there, charcoal. And then elipe, which is basically produce this fat in the seed. This is particularly in Sarawak, a very common rainforest species growing in the peat as well, and you can cultivate this. And this, on the years that it fruits, can produce more value per hectare than oil palm can, and this is totally indigenous forest tree species. So there are alternatives to phase out and phase in, and oil palm sector now is facing massive problem with labor shortage and others. If you can switch to tree species or others which need less labor input, then that is a better solution as well. So just to finish off, a final short case study on the ASEAN investment framework for haze-free sustainable land management. I think I already said, and we well know, the problem of fire and haze across the region. The impact is not only in Malaysia and Indonesia, but the whole of ASEAN affected. For the first 6 months of this year, the whole of the Mekong sub-region was covered in 5 million square kilometer smoke cloud. Millions were hospitalized. Tourist arrival dropped to nothing. Very big impacts. Overall, 70 million people impacted by smoke. 1 to 2 billion tons of CO2 emitted from fires. 50 million hectares of land impacted. And that leads to hundreds of billions of economic damage across the region. So the ASEAN investment framework is a platform to bring together partnerships and help to generate resources to finance sustainable land management approaches. So to try to bring together, we have a target under ASEAN of $1.5 billion to be leveraged for a range of actions, and this includes scaling up wetland, peatland rewetting and restoration, enhancing peatland management practices, phasing out drained agriculture on peat, scaling up agroforestry, new approaches to maize cultivation, and stopping the burning of the agricultural waste. So there are many possibilities identified. And this also links across to, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the ASEAN taxonomy for sustainable finance. This has been adopted by ASEAN under the working group of finance ministers and central bank governors, and is being introduced in Malaysia and other countries step by step by the central bank process. And that is what's leading to the reporting requirements. And the focus is on climate change, but biodiversity, protection of healthy ecosystem and biodiversity, you can see is amongst the top environmental objectives. And eventually this is leading to a traffic light system for projects, encouraging more so-called green projects, and stopping by a certain target deadline by 2030 or 2035 for any financing for fossil fuel-based projects or other so-called red projects. So this is going to have a major fundamental change in the finance flows, but we need to prepare for that and see that as an opportunity. This is area to start looking at investing in green or transition projects. And then there are 5 main objectives under the framework, and this is the latest figure of about 2.2 billion that's been identified as the needs based on the requests from the countries, and then in the process to identify international, national, local, and other financing mechanisms. And ASEAN is in the process of setting up a working group and task force to build that together and create opportunity for private sector and finance sector and others to get engaged in this process. And all of this will also, as well as addressing the haze, contribute to the SDGs and other key global targets. Maybe that's a good indicator of success. People still want to talk, so I'll be still around for a while, so happy to talk with things. Thank you.